All right, it being 6 o'clock on Wednesday, May 6, 2020, let's begin the second night in our series of budget hearings for the Committee of Ways and Means. All votes will be by roll call, and if you would like to speak for any members of the committee, please use the raise hand function. Clerk Semino, can we begin with the roll call, please?
Sure. Councilor Barica?
Here.
Councilor Connors?
Here.
Councilor Flaherty?
Here.
Councilor Ryan?
Here.
Councilor Sasha?
Here.
All present.
All right, thank you. I won't go through my whole spiel again this evening, except to say thank you very much to the department heads for joining us tonight and for all of the hard work you've put in constructing the budget, answering all of our questions. And just as a reminder for members of the public, please email your questions to the town council email inbox. We will be routing them to the proper department to make sure they get answered in time before the town meeting on June 2nd. Okay, so there are no minutes to approve this evening, and there is no new business, old business, sorry, there is new business. So we will be moving on to new business. Is there a motion to take off the table order 20038, Mayor FY 2021 operating budget, or take up any action relative thereto?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Clerk Semino, roll call vote, please.
Councilor Barica?
Yes.
Councilor Connors?
Yes.
Councilor Flaherty?
Yes.
Councilor Ryan?
Aye.
Councilor Sasha?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, that is unanimous. And we are going to begin tonight with the golf budget, which in your budget books is pages 107 to 115. And I know committee members submitted a fair number of questions on the golf budget. So I don't know, Solicitor Taub, if you or Darren Brown want to lead off with some opening remarks. You're on mute, Solicitor Taub.
Try that again. I will go ahead and just pass my laptop over to Director of Golf Operations, Darren Brown. But before I do that, I do just want to note that the evolution of the golf course has been pretty significant for the town of Braintree. And I think that this is a program that we're able to offer for residents and other members of the public alike that really serves a great public benefit. And I think the work that Darren and his team have done to really enhance the operations and the services provided, most recently taking over the food and beverage operation, has been pretty significant and a pretty high functioning and productive operation that I hope that the council will continue to support, not just this year, but in the years to come. And so with that, I will turn it over to Darren.
Good evening. Am I on mute?
No.
Nope, you're good.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening. Where would you like to start?
If you want to provide the members of the committee and for any of the people in attendance this evening, just a brief overview of the golf and the golf department and the function it serves in town, I think that would be very helpful.
Okay. I have been managing the golf course. This is my 27th year managing it for the town. We are a very busy public facility. The majority of our customers are from the surrounding towns and from the southern part of Boston. We annually do close to 40,000 rounds of golf per year. We are best known for our programs with special needs, veterans clinics for a number of years. And we also host 4 high school golf teams, as well as we do participate in some community functions, such we've had hay rides and movie nights, and a couple other outdoor activities when weather provides. So we have been active in that way. The golf course really has changed in the last 3 years with the large addition that was put onto the clubhouse in 2017. That doubled the size of our clubhouse and in turn allowed us to host many of the larger tournaments that other golf courses make substantial revenue off of. We were only able to seat about 55 to 60 people prior, and now we're able to host events with up to 150 people. So we really saw an uptick last year in the number of large events, and those events can bring in anywhere from $15,000 to $18,000 a day per event. We are also become quite a hotspot for residents for hosting small catering events where we've been doing graduation parties, family reunions, post-funeral memorial service luncheons. We were slated to hold the Lucas Flint Memorial this spring. So we've been very busy, very popular small destination for the residents. We do not charge a rental fee for residents. Along with that, we did complete our first full year of in-house food and beverage operations for the 2019 season. And we were on track prior to the virus for looking at close to a $60,000 to $75,000 profit on that. And the public remarks for food and service are tremendous compared to having contracted it out before through public bid processes where we ended up with less than desirable service. So this year we're entering into an exciting time period. We do have 2 golf course simulators that we keep in the clubhouse, and they were very busy. We were up 30% in revenue with those. And so we were seamlessly entering into what was looking to be a wonderful spring and a finish up.
Thank you so much for that overview, Mr. Round. I'd like to open it up at this time to any of the committee members to ask any questions. Counselor Flaherty?
Generally, as I understand it, the mayor's office asked for departments to cut their budgets by something close to 4%. But it doesn't seem that you guys have done that. Were you included in that request?
We were included in that request in general, but part of it was our largest increase was for food and beverage, and that was based on anticipated sales that we had this spring.
If I could also, can you hear me okay from here?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I would add to that is the golf program falls within the Department of Public Works. And so the Department of Public Works was asked to cut the 4%, which they did. So it was as a total budgetary program. DPW was given the directive, and DPW did in fact meet the 4%.
So the golf course is part of the DPW, and then including the golf course's budget, the DPW was still able to make 4% cuts?
Yeah, what Nicole was saying as part of the DPW, yes. But in looking at the budget, we did a large increase in our food and beverage program. So if you pulled that increase out, we actually did have an overall cut. But we had to pad that account because of anticipated functions and events that are coming up, so that we didn't have to keep coming back to town council and getting additional monies for food and beverages and part-time help for that department. So we asked for what we thought we would need with upcoming events. But overall, if you look at the budget, with the exception of food and beverage, I think that we are at a decrease overall.
The other thing I'm going to ask Jim Arsenal to talk about is the enterprise fund component of golf.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, how you doing? Good evening. So the golf is actually an enterprise fund, so it brings revenue in and it expends revenue. So it's self-funded, it's on its own, and so it's not part of the regular DPW, general fund criterion that the reduction was based on. So it's self-funded, it brings revenue in, the revenue goes out, and so that's what it relies on. It's different than just general fund money that's coming from ad valorem. So.
Well,
Okay.
yes, sometimes it brings revenue in, but recently it has had to ask the town council for additional funding because its revenues fell. And that money has been provided, but it's a concern for me because of its recent track record.
Understood. I'm just saying that overall, the way it operates, it has to balance the funding. If there is some shortfalls, that's something that needs to be considered. But another thing, what I'm trying to say is, if we increase funding, sometimes we actually generate more revenue from that. Like, in other words, if we're buying food products and we're selling the food products, we're making money from that additional generation. So it sounds kind of crazy, but when you're spending more, sometimes you're actually bringing more money in, because when we have those events that he talked about and everything, that actually brings money into the utility and helps self-fund it. And what happened also during the transition, because we've been transitioning over a period of a couple of years. First, we started off with the expansion of the area where we could have events, like it was indicated. Then we also brought in to have the food services brought in, and all during those changes, we were trying to get into a groove and trying to make sure that everything worked and functioned properly. So we're in a pretty good place this year, and we were going to, like Darren was saying, we were queued up to be in a very good position by the end of this year. Unfortunately, something happened that we didn't expect, but in the previous years, we were still getting that, situation straightened out, where the balance of how much we're bringing in versus how much revenue we're making. So it was a bit of a transition. So.
Okay.
Councillor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have one question, I think, for Ms. Taub, which is that these answers that we get to our questions, are they at any point distributed to the public? Because I don't see them in the agendas because they're coming fast and furious as we go, but a lot of these are based on input from residents, and I want to make sure that they can see these answers so we don't have to go through them all again in these meetings.
Certainly, Councilor Sasha, thank you for the question. The thought that I had was, as we move through probably more realistically at the end of the week, what I will do is compile them by department, and we will facilitate getting those uploaded, much like we did with the questions on the prior matters that came before this committee that had significant questions in advance. We're just trying to make sure that we're getting the committee the answers in advance to the best that we can based on when the questions are coming in. But I will make sure that we facilitate posting everything so that the public has access well in advance of the public hearing at the conclusion of the committee meetings.
Okay, thank you. So that was question one, because a lot of my questions were answered with the work that you did, and I just wanted to make sure. So I only have two questions remaining then. First would be, I assume based on the revenues that were provided that fiscal year 20 is going to be a loss for the golf course, right? Because it looks like April and May are pretty strong months typically, or April ramping up. May becomes one of the stronger months, which are pretty much not happening this year, maybe into June.
We're hoping to hear Saturday night.
Okay. Okay, so a month and a half might be out of what typically would be expected. And
Yes.
Since you've been operating on fairly thin margins or slightly negative margins recently, is it safe to assume that fiscal year 20 is looking like another loss?
I really can't say that until we get to the end of June. The golf market and the golf economy has been incredibly strong. The surrounding states have been sold out. literally during the week and the weekend. And we're getting a strong vibe that it's going to pick right back up when golf courses are allowed to open. We're hoping that is Saturday morning from what we're hearing today. Our membership renewals have been lower, but we actually make more by charging just regular greens fees, and we're going to a guaranteed credit card system at this point in time due to the virus. So I think that our revenues are going to be a little different in how they come in, but I think April is certainly going to be a loss, but I think there is a chance to gain some ground, certainly in the remainder of May and June. So I'm being optimistic in that we can pick back up.
Okay, and then my last question is you partially answered this question. I just wanted to be perfectly clear because a couple people asked about it. I had asked about the if any free tea time, free cards, free meals are provided to anybody. And I just wanted to be absolutely clear because you said there are some instances where you do for the Braintree High and some benefit programs, but aside from those, there is not. And the reason I ask is because there is two people mentioned to me, and I've never been to the golf course other than for a haunted hayride. So I don't know how it operates, but people have mentioned to me that there's a perception that some people are getting free tea time and I don't know how to address that other than to just ask you that.
Yeah, no, unless you are a paid member, you cannot book a tea time without a form of payment. And so that has been, and that's even tighter this year because all of our reservations for the first time this year are going to be guaranteed with a credit card. And while we're in the depths of the COVID-19 pandemic, you're going to have a credit card processed for payment at the time of reservation. So I have not heard that before. We do have, gosh, at one point in time, we had almost 60 junior members. So we have lots of kids running around and teeing off, and there's a lot of, on a summer day, it's pretty hectic up there. So maybe there's a perception of that, but no, not to my knowledge. And
Thank you. And I think I just wanted to follow up with the 2020 fiscal year question, maybe one more question for Solicitor Taub. If in the event the golf course ends up showing a loss for fiscal 2020 and we have to carry that forward into the fiscal 21 budget, is that anticipated somewhere in your numbers?
I'm going to ask Ed to address that, actually. Ed's here. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Hi, good evening. I'm wondering, could you just repeat the question once again?
So I'm just wondering, just based on everything going on, the golf course may not have a good year in finishing up fiscal year 20. And if they come in at a loss for the year, what does that do to the 21 budget that we're looking at?
If they came in and had a loss, we would need to cover that loss before we go to set our tax rate in the fall of 20 for our fiscal 21 budget in order to get our tax rate set so that we could get our real estate bills out for the third quarter by December 31st. Generally, we have the tax classification hearing in the first week in December, just after Thanksgiving. And the last 2 years, we needed to cover the previous year's golf deficit in order to set the tax rate for the next fiscal year.
Sorry, can you just clarify that? So why would we not? It sounds like we don't just transfer funds from a reserve account or something to cover it. Why does it affect our tax rate for the following
in conjunction with the tax rate, it's taking the votes of the town council in the operating budget, and it's also taking into account the deficit of the prior year from the enterprise fund. In the whole process, the state requires us to cover the prior year deficit. And we've done that with the transfer last year of the golf deficit back in December. And if we had a deficit at the end of this year, fiscal 20, we would need to cover that deficit prior to us setting the tax rate at the Department of Revenue. I don't know if Sean wants to pipe in if he has a comment.
Thank you, Ed. Just Ed's correct. Anytime there's a deficit in an enterprise fund, it must be raised on the subsequent recap. I had a client that happened to this past year as well, and the same thing. Have to raise it. DOR will not allow it to continue to be in a deficit.
Okay, but it doesn't affect the tax rate either way. It doesn't affect your levy calculation. It's just that you have to clear it off the books before you can do the calculation. Is that right?
It has to be cleared off the books. That's correct, Counselor.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, the way that we have cleared it off the books in the past is to use free cash to cover it.
Yes, the last 2 years, we've transferred money from free cash over to cover the deficit.
So that's just a greater concern this year because free cash is already being hit so hard to balance the budget. If the golf course's revenue is in jeopardy of not meeting expectations, we're thinking about covering that with free cash. That's a problem.
Counselor Ryan, you had a question. I want to make sure we get to you.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions. I see that in the budget, we're reducing labor and custodians by almost 100,000. And I was wondering if that could be explained.
Sure, I'll turn it back over to Darren.
We had 2 open positions, people that had left, full-timers, and we are taking the opportunity to model our staffing along other municipal golf course budgets that have a much smaller full-time footprint. So by reducing those 2 full-time positions, we're going to be saving money in healthcare and in pension along with the salaries. And we're going to be utilizing more part-time and seasonal help. We have been, for many years, we've taken pride in that we have provided a livable wage for the municipal employees that work full-time. And so we've had the opportunity to reduce that size of that full-time staff and replace them with part-time seasonal staff.
Thank you. And with the $53,000 increase for the food and beverage, that's just, you haven't had a lot of historical budget numbers, and the first year was the best guess you could come up with, and you think this is more representative of what you're going to need for the upcoming year?
Yes, and all of our food and all of our beverages is at a minimum of 75% markup. So when we request more money for those particular line accounts, it is all a huge moneymaker for us. But if we don't have the events, we're not gonna lose. I mean, we're not gonna use the money. It's just if we eventually do get picked back up with events, which we're hoping at some point, that we wanted to have those funding there. We had 12 events booked this spring, huge events that were outside of the normal golf revenue. They were going to be extra, but those had to be canceled. And so looking at that going forward, we just wanted to have enough funds because this budget will carry us into next spring. And we're certainly hoping by then things will be a little bit different.
Okay. And then the next point I want to make is, Counselor asked earlier if we have we're going to be short on our revenues for FY20. And I mean that from the perspective of what we thought we were going to be, because we've been shut down for a little while. So for the FY21 budget forecast, it had $100,000 coming from the golf course under revenue. So I guess this is a question for the money people. Do we anticipate that we're going to have that 100,000 for revenue for FY21?
Are you talking about the transfer to general fund line account, Counselor?
I'm talking about the $100,000 listed under revenue for the FY21 budget.
Okay, let me pass you to Ed.
That number is factored into the budget and it appears in one of his line items under his program 01 administration. And we do anticipate receiving that money from the golf course, from the fiscal 21 operations.
So that revenue will be earned during FY21 and given back to the general fund during FY21.
That's correct, Counselor.
Thank you. I just want to say that we had the library before us last night, and I think a lot of people agreed what a tremendous asset the library is for the town of Braintree. And I would say that the golf course is just another wonderful part of the community in Braintree. We're very lucky to have our own golf course, and Mr. Brown does a great job at the golf course, and fully support this budget. And I hope that we can get back to somewhat way of life, because I think being able to go out and play golf, if you do it safely, is something that people should be able to enjoy very soon. So hopefully that's going to happen, and thank you very much.
If I might add something, in analyzing other municipal golf budgets, which I kind of leaned into pretty heavy during the season, we're one of the few municipals that gives revenue back to the town in the form of a transfer to general fund. This year, in this current budget, we returned almost 95,000, and next year we're looking at over 100,000. Since 2004, the golf course has returned $1.1 million back to the town. So yes, we've had 3 years that have been tough. But prior to that, we were doing pretty well, and we were able to invest in the golf course, and we were able to make a lot of improvements. So I don't believe that the golf course has always been taking. We have been givers for my 27 years, and you know, we've had some extenuating circumstances. And certainly this year, I think, is the most extenuating circumstance that we have encountered. If you look at what the revenue projections were and what the revenue intake was for the first half of this fiscal year, we were over $100,000 well ahead. And we were really looking forward to having a great story to tell. Our simulator business was up over 30%. Our food and beverage revenue was scheduled to make $75,000, $75,000, and business is really looking to be great. But we've taken it on the chin, like all the other small businesses in town. We are owned by the government, but we are a small business. We really are. And so I'm feeling the pain. The mayor knows my frustrations in not being open. It's tough. And we have a lot of employees that are concerned about it. But you know, this was the year that, especially with a new council, that we were going to be able to have a fresh start, and people could see, oh, wow, you know, the golf course has really got it going, and they've got some new aspects to their business, and the revenue is being generated, is covering costs and then some. That was the story that we were on track to tell. I don't want to close the book on this fiscal year yet. I'd like to see where we are from what we're seeing with surrounding golf courses, with people still out of work, for whether it's they're without a job or they're working from home. Almost every day is being treated like a weekend. The golf courses in Connecticut and Rhode Island have been opened up all along, and they have been booked solid 7 days a week, not just on the weekends. So we're hoping to tap into that when we get the green light to go, which we're hearing is going to be tonight, to open up on Saturday with a limited opening. So we will see what transpires there. But if you remove out the food and beverage aspect of our budget, we did make some deep and significant cuts. And the increases that we had were really increases that are just beyond my control as a manager with healthcare increases in pension and town insurance. Other than that, it's been a pretty level funded budget, and we were able to eliminate 2 significant positions. We're doing the best that we can. We have had a couple years that have been substandard, but we're really feeling like that we have a formula to go forward.
Counselor Connors?
Hi, so I just have a couple of questions on, and you guys answered most of my questions, so thank you. My questions have more to do with, for going forward with your functions. You've talked about, the golf course, the social distancing and all of that, that's pretty understood. But how is the social distancing that you're gonna have to start in the foreseeable future anyway, for all these bookings that you have, how is that going to affect your budget and your food costs? Have you taken that into account for at least the next 4 to 6 months? Because they're going to have to, like as in restaurants, they're talking about decrease into 50%. You have a function for 100 people, the room fits 90 people or 100, 110, but now you can only put 50 in there. So how is that going to affect your budget? And I know you haven't accounted for it because obviously this came after you did your budgets, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about how many functions do you have a year? How much do you think that's going to affect your food budget?
So last year was our first full year of operating the food and beverage department in-house. And we never planned on, when doing revenue projections, having any functions. We planned on picking up 2 or 3 tournaments along the way, which is what we did. But all the small events that kind of came up as the reputation of the food and beverage service and the golf course facility increased was unexpected revenue. It wasn't in our projections when we were formulating the department or the program in general. So 95 to 96% of the revenue that we plan on when doing the budget, even from year 1, was based on just the regular average daily sales, which the current COVID-19 situation really won't have much of an effect on. The majority of golfers are grabbing their soda, water, beer, Powerade, hot dogs, hamburgers, wrap sandwiches, and candy bars. Really makes up almost $320,000 of our revenue. And we don't see that changing. We're not seeing that changing in some of the surrounding golf courses that are operating in the pandemic. And so I don't see that changing. I do believe we're not going to have the tournaments, the large scale tournaments, the large scale events, but those were never figured in to our original plan for the food and beverage operation. Those were really going to be up and above what expected revenues were going to be. We sold just under 6,000 hot dogs last year. I mean, I'm only throwing that out there because that's really what our bread and butter is for the business. We did like 3,000 wrap sandwiches, and we sold 7,000 waters. So most of that stuff comes out of our snack shed and out of our beverage cart. So any of the functions that are not going to happen right away inside, I don't see them affecting our revenue projections going forward. I did put extra money into the program so that things, they were obviously, that budget was formulated for the pandemic, and we had to cover some larger events that were coming up. But it is good to have it in there. It's not, if we don't need it, we're not going to use it. If we don't have the events, we don't need to buy the food, we don't need to pay the staff, but it is there. And I think eventually there is going to be some return to normalcy. A lot of our most profitable events were 50 or 60 person events, which even with increased social distancing, I think the square footage of the clubhouse will allow us to still have some of those. I think there's also going to be a new look, a new normal to the way that the large outings and fundraisers where we have 150 people occur. Instead of having a sit-down dinner, the dinner might be eating in your golf cart and driving off. Or it might be in a larger spot in a parking lot if it's a sunnier day. So in the golf industry, we're still trying to see what the new normal is going to be. But from the business model of the food and beverage department at the golf course, we're going to be okay without having all these small private catered events. They actually, like, as I said, they just kind of came out of nowhere, and they took on a life of its own, and we kept getting more and more and more and more calls as residents kind of found out about the facility that we have to offer.
So they're not included in the budget for the 21, all these little small private functions that you're talking about.
They are, and they are. That's why you saw an increase in my food and part-time help for those line accounts, so that we do have funding available should those come back.
Okay, and so the food costs are not just your startup, like when I looked at it, I thought it was your initial, this is what we need to get going for the season. We go out and we buy, you know, all the what I call startup food, right? When you reopen for the season or whatever. So this isn't just startup food for the season. It's food that you anticipate buying for the season. And if you exceed the costing of it, obviously you're making more money, right? Because you're selling all that food, so you're making more money. So it just comes out of the revolving fund more, so not revolving fund, because this is not revolving, sorry, enterprise. So it really just kind of jacks that one line up if you have to go buy food above and beyond the 50,000, but your revenues are increasing in trifold coming back, correct?
Correct. Yeah. If we ever come back and request more money for food and drink, that's a wonderful new thing to hear.
Right. Because in the end, we're making out on it.
Yeah. Having been behind the doors here and been involved with the new venture from ground zero, it is shocking how much money there is to be made in food and beverage, seeing that firsthand. And it has been, I think, a wonderful endeavor for the golf course. We had a very successful first year, and our food and beverage manager is fantastic. And we still have bright hopes for the future. And she does a fantastic job with all of her small events, as well as we have a great staff of local kids that do work in the business, and it's been nothing but great. As I said, though, if you did pull out the 53,000, I think that we added for additional funding in that line account, I think overall our budget was pretty flat.
Down 1.8, I think, without the 50. Oh no.
52K. 52K is the difference between your budget from last year. Right around there, close enough. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other counselors have questions for Mr. Brown? I have a question, and maybe I just want to make sure I'm 100% clear on the free cash and the deficit for the golf course. And so maybe this is for you, Mr. Brown, or maybe this is for Ed.
I think this might be for Ed. Let me slide you back over to Ed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So let's just say we get $0 in April, which is probably pretty accurate from FY20. And if it was flat to last year, that would be like $67,000 that we wouldn't be. That's the golf. I'm just trying to understand, like, if there's a deficit for fiscal year 20,
Okay.
how does that impact the 21 budget? And I apologize that if you already covered this, I lost the thread.
If we had a deficit for the golf fund for June 30, 20, we would need to cover that deficit by transferring funds from free cash to bring that deficit up to zero.
Okay.
Before we go to set our tax rate in generally the end of November, first week in December. We need to have that covered and have the council vote on it before we submit everything to the Department of Revenue for the approval of our tax rate for fiscal 21.
So would that then impact our free cash that would be available for fiscal year 21?
The free cash will be calculated based on our books when we close them on June 30, 2020. We close the books, prepare the statements, and send them to the state, and they will review and approve a free cash number at that point. Generally, it's in September, October timeframe. And we would have that certified free cash as of June 30, 2020. And that amount, that account, or that number would be available to be used to cover the golf if there were a deficit in that fund as of June 30, 2020.
So is it possible, and again, I want to echo what Counselor Ryan said, I think the golf course, it's a great resource and some really nice green space in town. But is it possible to estimate and project at this point, given that we're now 8 weeks into social distancing and a complete shutdown of the economy, what our loss is going to be in 20, so that we understand, because we're already projecting 2.3 million from free cash to cover the budget gap. And if we're going to stack some on top of that to cover the golf, could we get a projection of that, Ed, just so we understand the full scope of what we're using for free cash?
Yes, on the golf, I think Darren had provided you a summary of golf and green fee revenue.
Yep.
And the first 9 months, the golf fund had exceeded their previous year's revenue by about $151,000.
Yep.
And I think we can agree that April is gone. And depending on when the golf course opens and with what restrictions, again, we'll get guidance from the state, I believe, in the next week or so. Once that happens, we'll have a date where we think we can open, and based on that, could probably look at, you know, the first week of revenue and see how that would compare to prior years.
Yeah.
Okay, so the golf cart and green fees, is that schedule is what we should be, is our estimates for all of the revenue from the golf club?
This does not include the food and beverage, but for this component, the year-over-year comparison for the first 9 months was up over $150,000 from the prior year.
Okay, so maybe if we say, and I'm just to get an understanding of the scope of the magnitude, right? If it's, we're going to lose $67,000 for April and maybe half of May, that's about $150,000 total.
Yeah, I don't know how I'd come up, how to estimate that. But
Counselor Connors?
So, and I just want to ask one quick question. In newbie still learning, this is a newbie question. How come the food is not in a revolving account versus because you have money in, money out, it's a revolving account, you're buying food, you're selling it, you're making money, it's more, how come it's in the enterprise versus a revolving? And I know you have some technical answer for that, but I don't know it.
the golf had been set up as an enterprise fund, and when 2 years ago, this was handled by a private contractor.
Right. So
When
it's
it was started up, the golf had come to the town and requested a supplemental appropriation in the golf enterprise fund for this. And it was set up that way in a food service program.
So I know we're voting on a revolving account for them tonight, but I didn't know if in sometime in the future, if that would ever be a consideration where the food and beverage, where once it becomes steady, excuse me, and more reliable, it becomes more of a revolving account. So you don't have to budget in the food per se, I guess you would say.
Sure, we could have, I'm sorry, through the chair. We could surely look into that in a similar situation to what we're doing for the merchandise at the pro shop. We had set up a revolving account for that. We could set up a separate one for the food service. Can talk to the golf and see what other communities are doing and get some input from Sean. I think he deals with some golf enterprise funds also, and find out what they're doing.
Right. No, just a question. I just didn't know what justifies a revolving account versus what justifies an enterprise account, and how we make that differential. And Learning, I'm learning.
No, very good question. And yeah, there are different statutes that
they
derive
are.
what an enterprise fund can do in a revolving fund. And
Yep.
I can work with the golf and your auditor, and we can look into that and come back to you.
Sean, do you deal with have you dealt with revolving accounts for food and beverage, or is it usually enterprise?
The other golf courses, the other muni golf courses I've had in the past, as an external auditor, I don't believe had food and beverage. I'd have to kind of go back and rack my brain to see if I did have one that had food and beverage component to it.
Okay. All right, I'm going off subject. I'm done. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Any other counselors have questions for Mr. Brown on the golf budget? And again, I want to thank you, Mr. Brown, and the mayor's office for providing us with all of the answers to the questions we submitted before. Ed?
Oh, we do have a golf revolving account to discuss.
Yes. Yep.
I'll turn it back over to Darren.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a revolving account that Ed and I had set up a few years ago pertaining to merchandise and the operations of our women's and kids clinics. So this year we're looking to request the same amount of $110,000, which covers merchandise and pays for supplies for the women's and kids clinics, as well as the 2 staff members that do oversee the clinics for us. So we do already have one revolving account in place, and we need to get that money voted as well. Correct, Ed?
Counselor Connors?
Sorry, Charlie, I beat you to the raise hand function.
Right.
I just have one question. I thought revolving funds couldn't have salaries or labor costs in them. I thought it was a strict material type revolving.
The statute was amended several years ago to allow salaries to be used.
Ed said the statute was amended several years ago to allow that.
Okay, interesting.
The salaries we take out are just some seasonal staff that come in and teach on an hourly basis.
Right, so it's a part-time type thing versus
Yeah.
full salary with benefits
Yeah,
and everything.
no benefits, no nothing. It's just some seasonal instructors that come in and help out residents.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Ryan?
Madam President, I was going to make a motion. Do I need to make the motion to take it off the table first, Sue?
Yes, please.
Okay, so 20040, Mayor, FY 2021 budget revolving accounts, or take up any action related thereto. Take a motion to take this off the table.
Second.
Sue, do we need a roll call vote for that?
Yes, please. Counselor Barica.
Yes.
Counselor Connors.
Aye.
Counselor Flaherty.
Yes.
Counselor Ryan.
Yes.
Counselor Sasha.
Yes.
All in favor, take off the table.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for favor recommendation to the full council. Order 20040R8, that the mayor be authorized to use a revolving fund in accordance with the provisions of Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53E.5, that may be spent by the mayor in conjunction with the golf green superintendent without further appropriation during the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2020, for the collection of fees and payments from the collection of revenue generated from clinics and payments for group and individual lessons in the sale of pro shop materials collected during the fiscal year 2021. The mayor may spend up to $110,000 revolving funds money during FY 21. So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Clerk Semino?
Counselor Barica.
Yes.
Counselor Connors.
Aye.
Counselor Flaherty.
Yes.
Counselor Ryan.
Aye.
Counselor Sasha.
Yes.
All in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can at this time, if you would like to just finish this business, we can table this to May 7th. And we don't have to do it at the end.
Oh, okay, yep. So motion, is there a motion to table, is it 20040, Sue?
Yes, it is.
Motion to
So-
table,
So moved.
is there a second? A roll call vote, please, Clerk Semino?
Council Berica,
Yes.
Council Connors,
Yes.
Council Flaherty,
Yes.
Council Ryan,
Yes.
Council Sasha.
Yes.
All in favor, thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions for Mr. Brown before we move on to the next portion of the budget review? Okay.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. So the next item on this evening's agenda is Law Office, and that is on pages 17 and 18 of your books. And we will hear from Solicitor Taub.
Just gonna make a joke and say I'm gonna turn the computer over to myself. And I put a different hat on for this portion. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to come before you and speak a little bit about what my office does as far as the provision of legal services to the town. I think all of you are familiar at this point, but as a just a very brief overview, under my direction, the legal office in the town provides legal counsel to the mayor, our various town departments, boards, commissions, and the council when requested. We practice in a whole host of different legal areas, including labor and employment law, employment discrimination and harassment, contract-related issues, including both negotiation of terms and drafting of contracts, zoning, land use, construction, environmental issues, civil rights, tort liability, charter interpretation, municipal finance, and ethics and conflict of interest. I always say one of the true values of practicing in municipal law is you get exposure to just about every area of legal practice that there is out there. And so for me, it has been a true pleasure to serve in this capacity for the town for what's going on almost the last 2 years. As you have seen from the FY21 budget submission, I made several reductions in what I would refer to as the discretionary lines, including the purchase of office supplies, claim settlements, and excuse me, dues and memberships. There were also reductions made based on actual contractual costs, including things like my town issued cell phone and the legal research software that my office uses through Westlaw, which is a set cost based on a 3-year contract term. I thought it was important in reducing dues and memberships to make sure that there was sufficient funding in the line to cover bar dues for myself and my second staff member, as well as to include at least one membership fee in a legal organization, whether that's the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, the Inn of Court, or the local bar association. The one major change that I'm sure everybody has seen is somewhat of a reorganization that the mayor and I are jointly proposing in the scope of both of our budgets. The legal office has had funded a part-time legal assistant / paralegal, as well as a part-time assistant, a town solicitor, a position that's been held by John Goldrosen since before I joined the town 2 years ago. In speaking with the mayor and considering the interim role that I have played for him over the course of the last 4 months, we decided that it would be best suited to combine the two roles, that of the town solicitor and that of the chief of staff, and then restructure the legal office to provide for a full-time assistant solicitor to assist with the day-to-day operations. The legal assistant position was vacant when I started, and it was a position that I never filled. administrative tasks are handled mostly by myself, and payroll and assistance with invoices has been historically handled through the mayor's office. And so I felt that it was more valuable to transition the part-time position into that of a full-time attorney so that they could provide more day-to-day legal support to the various town departments, boards, commissions, and the council, as I had mentioned, was the function of the office earlier in this presentation. I also, with very, very great sadness, report that John Goldrosen, who has been an incredible asset to this office and to this community in his role as the assistant solicitor, has reported to me, and I have his permission to share, is going to be looking to retire. And so in thinking about that and thinking about the potential for reorganization, this felt like the best time to do it. And as reflected in the materials, you have the reorganization, not just of my office, but also of the mayor's office, yields a savings of almost $100,000 in the overall operating budget. So with that, I also, if I may, in a follow-up to the conversation that we had last night about the billboards, the latest update is that the court has rescheduled the post-trial hearing on the appeal on 290 Wood Road for June 5th. So that is currently scheduled for June 5th with the land court. And with that, I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
Counselor Connors?
So I'm going to ask the question.
Okay.
And I think you do a great job. This has absolutely nothing to do with you. It has to do with checks and balances in the system. So have we talked to an outside resource or outside to confirm that there's no conflict of interest with you being a town solicitor and a chief of staff for the mayor? Not that I'm saying anything bad, but you know what I'm saying, Nicole. There's checks and balances in the system, and they're there for a reason. And so my concern is that, you know, if there is an issue that comes up, you as the town solicitor are kind of in your world. You're a town solicitor, yes, you work for the mayor, but you're not his chief of staff. And so when you make decisions based on being a town solicitor. And now we have a merge of a job that can conflict with each other when you're making those decisions. So have we confirmed that there's no definitive conflict of interest with this merging of the positions?
So I appreciate it's awkward coming from me as
It is
that we're talking about, and that's okay. I appreciate the question. I can tell you that for the last 4 months, I've been serving in a dual capacity. And in the year and a half, roughly leading up to that, I work as the town solicitor. I work for the mayor, and it is my responsibility to ensure that the town manages and engages in legal behavior and makes legal choices. And I think I protect the town from risk. That is a big part of my job.
You do a great job. And I'm not,
No.
absolutely not going, it was very hard for me to ask this question without trying to offend you or upset you.
No. Not at all. I appreciate the question. And I can tell you that historically, the advice that I give would be no different. And I would suggest that if, while I don't anticipate it, if I find myself in a position where there's a question being asked of me as, say, the chief of staff, my answer would be the lawful one, regardless. And so I don't foresee, I always think of ethics as something, I say this a lot, where the circles overlap. And if your circles overlap, you potentially are going to have a problem. I don't envision or can't envision a situation where the circles would overlap. If there was a question, I would suggest that we would consult outside counsel. There is a line in the town solicitor's budget that allows for the engaging of outside counsel. We have done that on large scale zoning projects. We have done that on large labor matters, on large contract disputes. And so if an issue were to arise where there needed to be some separation for whatever reason, if there's something that we haven't thought about, there's certainly funding available to support that. I'll also say that there are other entities that have a dual chief of staff and town solicitor, and in some cases, and probably in most cases, I would suggest it's more efficient, because when you're making high level policy decisions, you're going to want to make sure that they are in line with any applicable laws, laws or regulations. And so having me serve in both capacities kind of takes one layer out of the equation, because conversations are being had and advice is being given that takes into consideration any potential legal ramifications.
So I definitely agree with you that, you know, I know you would make the right decisions by the law. My concern is that there may be a perception from people that you're doing both jobs and starting to question your decision. So I guess my comment is there any reason why we couldn't just go to, I'm sure we have the lawyers on retainer, right? We have the consultant, and just have them put it, you know, in right, just to protect you most of all. But, you know, also get rid of the perception that people may have of, well, now she's doing both jobs, and how are we going to get a fair decision? We know you're going to do that, but there may be a perception issue. So is there any reason why we couldn't just go get an outside opinion to confirm that there's no conflict?
I can certainly talk to the mayor about it, but, you know, I would hope that, and whether it's me or whether it's somebody else,
right?
The roles work in tandem, and so it's not a situation where there would be opposing. I can't imagine one where there would be a conflicting viewpoint, because the two positions work in tandem and they both work for the mayor in an advisory capacity. And so, you know, I can certainly share the concern with the mayor and ask him how he would like to handle it. But I don't, like, as I said, I don't see that as a situation where there's a conflict, because they run on a parallel track as opposed to one that would intersect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Councillor Flaherty?
Well, I raised my hand, and then Solicitor Taub, she kind of answered it, but my question was originally about the combination of the two jobs, and then what you mentioned was that there are other examples. There's precedent for this in other communities, and I thought, well, that's good news, because that's really what my question was about. But I'd like to know more about that, because I want to make sure that the scale of the communities where we see that kind of a mashing together of two, what has always seemed to me to be really big roles, in those other examples, are those communities as large or as complex as Braintree? Because I can imagine it being much simpler to do in a tiny little town, whereas we're pretty big. Not the biggest, though.
So just to clarify, you know, I wasn't being specific about communities. What I had referenced was agencies, and the one that comes to mind is there's a large, I think it's a public state university that has the two roles that are combined to advise the president of the university. That's what I was thinking of in my mind. And then I just think about my own personal experience, not just with this administration, but with prior, and the overlap that exists between the two roles. And so, yes, they are two large roles. They both require a significant amount of responsibility, as I said, that I've taken on for the last 4 months, but also the addition of the full-time assistant solicitor is going to be significant to help supplement the daily workload associated with the legal aspect of the job.
Okay.
Councillor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I share some of Councillor Connor's concerns. And I think that when it comes down to it, really my concern has nothing to do with what the mayor is proposing right now or with this new role. It's the fact that that the legal function has always, for over a decade now, sat under the mayor, which I think is just, it is you know, it potentially creates some conflict always has, always will. I don't think this makes it any worse. And the fact that it is how the mayor wants to staff his office and potentially saves the town some money at a time that we are trying very hard to find ways to do that. I am not at all opposed to this, you know, to this change in staffing. The one thing I would say though is, as we speak about these concerns, are there any other things that can be done to give the council a little more assurance, let's say? And you know, the one thing I would point to is Mr. McGoldrick having access to an independent audit function has been an enormous service to the council and to the residents, to be a check on the numbers coming out of the mayor's office. Not that it's, you know, right or wrong, but just to have that second set of eyes on things has been fantastic. So are there any other options that the town could consider, just as one quick example, taking some of that legal service budget and moving it under the council so that it could always be transferred back if the town needed it? But if the council wanted to retain some kind of independent legal advice, they would have the means to do that. And there might be other solutions. I'm just throwing that out there. Thank you.
So in other communities, the question of the council as a legislative branch obtaining its own independent legal counsel has come up. And the overwhelming legal opinion and determination on that is that it would be inappropriate for the legislative body of a town to engage with independent legal counsel. And so the rules, I think, as we all know, are fairly clear as to what type of advice the town solicitor can offer to the council. And my office would continue to do that, either through myself or through, hopefully, the full-time solicitor that gets hired. If there was, you know, if we took me out of the equation and we were asking the town solicitor for an opinion as to whether or not this was appropriate, you know, I just, it's awkward because it's me and I'm here talking about myself, and I'm talking about myself doing two roles. But if you were to ask, like, say, John Goldrosen for an opinion on whether or not the town solicitor and the chief of staff can be the same person, it might be less awkward. And I think the answer would be the same, that there would be no conflict. And so I appreciate Councilor Sasha, you know, the comment about this is how the mayor has chosen to staff his office. This is what he believes is the most efficient way to move forward and the most productive and effective way to move forward for the community. And so the law is the law. And when I'm asked to provide an opinion, or I'm asked to handle something, if it's not in conformance, or if it's not in conformance with the law or violates some law, I can tell you that I wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't expect anybody to do it. And so the role of the town solicitor's office does fall under the mayor. He is effectively the chief client, but the responsibilities do allow for advice to other departments and the council. And I don't disagree that there may be times it happened. I saw it happen in my prior, my prior legal life, where perhaps the interests of the council and the interests of the mayor are different. But at the end of the day, like I said, the law is the law, and that's what the advice is going to be based on.
Councilor Connors?
All right, well, one more question, sorry.
Okay.
And I was gonna bring it up on the mayor's side, but I might as well just bring it up on here, right?
It'll be me either way.
So can you just give me the background on how the change in salary, like how you guys came about that? Is it a step thing? Is it a grade thing? Like how that number comes about?
Absolutely, I'm glad you asked. So I, as the town solicitor, was an M28 E-step. And when the mayor asked me to take on the added responsibility of being the interim chief of staff, we added a stipend to my base salary to cover the acting role. What we have decided to do, and I'll say that at my suggestion, was maintain my current salary with the stipend, which brings it to an M32 E-step. So I would basically continue earning the same, approximately the same gross wages from now until January 1st. What that means is I am foregoing my 3% that we talked about last night for the first 6 months of fiscal year 21. And then on January 1st, I would go to the next step, which is a 33 E-step, which would basically be when that 3% would take effect. And so that decision I felt was fair. It effectively is a 1-year probationary period at the lower rate, with the 3% taking effect halfway through the year. Given the climate that we're facing and what I felt was the fiscally responsible option for the town, that's how we came to the determination, and still allowed us to save a fairly significant amount of funds in the overall operating.
Thank you. I'm still learning that grade step thing, man. That is a
Yeah.
tough one. You guys have a tough
If you
system.
ever want to sit down, we'll happy. I'll say Karen and I are happy to go over it with you.
Counselor Flaherty?
Well, I have to ask the question now. What are we going to call you? I mean, you're not just Solicitor Taub anymore.
Well, 9 times out of 10, Nicole is just fine. So I know I will say this, a true honor to have Mayor Kokoris ask me to take on this role with him in this administration, something that I have enjoyed tremendously over the course of the last 4 months. I mean, never in a million years did I think this was the universe that I was going to be advising in whether it's, policy or legal capacity. But I truly look forward in both capacities to continue working with him and his administration and all of you as we work through this incredibly difficult time with hopefully brighter days ahead.
Any other questions from the council? Okay, Nicole, I just want to say thank you for all of your efforts, especially overall, but also with this process. I know it's been a humongous undertaking, and I really appreciate all the guidance that your office as a whole, the mayor's departments have provided us. So thank you for all that. Okay, if there's no other questions on law, we can move on to mayor's office, which is also staff top. And that's pages 4 to 6 in the budget books.
Gonna switch folder.
Yep, take your time. I have to pull my notes too.
Thank you.
Yep.
Switching gears now to the mayor's office. As I think everybody knows, that working under the direction of the mayor is the chief executive for the town. The mayor's office is responsible for the daily management of our government, including oversight of all financial matters, town planning and the town's planning and development. The current staffing for the mayor's office includes services coordinator Kate Naughton, personal assistant to the mayor Steve Leary, and myself as the interim chief of staff working under the direction of Mayor Kokoris. In reviewing the FY21 budget submission, we went through again and looked for some of those discretionary accounts that have been historically underspent. And made reductions in those areas. As you've seen, the majority of the reductions are based on prior year spending. One I would highlight is mileage. Mayor Kokoris does tend to use the electric vehicle as opposed to his own vehicle, which we are anticipating will result in a significant reduction in mileage expenses in fiscal 21. In addition to the reorganization of the office through the Chief of Staff Town Solicitor role, there was previously staffed under the Mayor's office what was referred to as the Project Manager IT position. That was a position that was held by Andrew Marin. Andrew left the town and went over to the schools in December of last year, and the position has remained vacant since his departure. What we did do, given all of the high-level technology-related projects that Andrew was involved in, most specifically the transition to Munis, we entered into an agreement with Andrew that allows him to continue to provide services as it pertains in large part to Munis, while also being able to meet his obligations to the school department. So the project manager IT line has been partially funded to allow us to compensate Andrew for services under that agreement that we've entered into, as well as potentially looking to fill the position at a later point in the year, depending on how things progress, to have somebody back in the mayor's office full-time in that capacity if it's determined to be necessary. And so the adjustments, as you've seen, the chief of staff salary funding was moved entirely into the mayor's office, which is why you see a percentage increase despite the request to make the reductions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee members? Nicole, I have a question. So is the so is Andrew being funded partially by mayor's office and partially by school department?
So he's receiving his full-time salary from the school department. If the Munis implementation requires him to take time away from that, we're basically balancing it out so that he's being compensated for doing both jobs.
Okay, but we don't have a dedicated IT person under the mayor's office then right now.
That is correct. We do have our contract with Belds that allows for some IT and technological support, so we continue to use that, but we do not have somebody serving in that project manager role at this time.
Thank you. Councilor Shasha?
Sorry, you know what? I apologize. I'm getting ahead of myself in the questions. I don't actually. Wait, actually, maybe I do.
Take your time.
The Commission on Disabilities falls under the mayor's office, right? That's. Is that?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that was moved. Give me 1 second to confirm, but I think that we moved that down to the building department.
I think it's under Mary Beth now.
Yeah.
Inspectional service.
Yeah, so both the Commission on Disabilities and the Substance Use Prevention Program have been moved under municipal licenses and inspections because Mary Beth and her office oversee both of those functions.
Okay. I think that's why I'm getting confused. They're still called Mayor Commission on Disabilities. I think that's what was tripping me up.
So you have two programs. You have the Fair Housing Commission, which was moved in FY19 down to planning. And then you have the Commission on Disabilities, which I believe at the same time was moved down to municipal licenses and inspections. So while they're still referenced, that's why there's $0 being requested.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Nicole, I just have two questions, and let me know if this doesn't fall under this segment. The first is the technology that we're using and have been using through Zoom. I'm wondering and curious about the length of the contract we have, specifically if we're going to be able to employ this for better outreach post-COVID world, and wondering what that contract is and if it's in this FY21 budget. And then the second question unrelated to that is where BEMA would fall.
Yep.
Braintree Emergency Management.
Thank you for the reminder. On Zoom, so the licenses that we have been using to adjust for COVID-19 related restrictions was actually purchased by the school department.
Okay.
And so the school department has purchased at least 2 licenses, and that's how they've been sharing that capability with the town. So I'm not familiar with the terms of those, unfortunately.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me about BEMA, particularly in this time where they have truly risen to the occasion and been providing incredible support to our residents. BEMA is actually not funded out of the town's operating budget. They have been funded through it's a civil defense fund with money received as a result of the power plant. I understand that the plant is closing or has closed, and there is still some money coming in. It is not the full amount, and at some point that is going to stop. But in reviewing the balance in the civil defense fund, there is a significant amount of funding available that will carry them through at least through fiscal 21, and the mayor's office fully intends to continue to support that operation.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Connors.
What was the commission, Nicole? I'm sorry, I missed that. For BEMA? What did you call it?
Oh, civil defense.
Civil, Jesus, okay.
And is that
Thank you.
through the federal government?
It's state funded.
Okay.
So BEMA,
It's the nuke power plant.
it came from the Pilgrim power plant, but it funneled to us, I believe, through the state. And BEMA has been quite fiscally responsible, and so they have a good bit of reserves there.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Did you have a question, Councillor Flaherty?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Nope. Okay, I think we can move on to our final agenda item for this evening, which is finance. And that,
Turn it over to Ed.
Good evening again. I could give just a brief overview of finance, or I don't know if you had a different way you'd like to go about.
that would be great, Ed. Yep.
Sure. In the outline, the accountant in me talks about systems and processes, and basically finance. My accounting professor said there are basically 3 operations: a cash receipts, a cash disbursements, and a payroll function. And that's what the finance division oversees for the town of Braintree, and that encompasses all of the town's finances. Cash receipts includes the receiving of the funds from the state, our billing of things like motor vehicle excise, real estate, personal property, billing of water and sewer, and trash. The cash disbursements process basically is taking the approved budget that's presented by the mayor, approved by you, and that's a blueprint for our expenditure map. And from there, we track our actual expenses against the budget and make disbursements on a weekly basis for accounts payable and on a bi-weekly basis for the town's payroll. And those 3 operations basically encompass what we do here in finance. And under the finance operations, there are 10 different programs that deal with the finance administration, the accounting, assessing, information technology, insurance, treasurer collector, and then there is principal on debt, interest on debt, lease payments, and the capital account. And basically the finance division, as I noted, our 3 main clients or customers are the public, the employees, including the mayor, department heads, and the council, and we provide services to you, to the other department heads and the public. That is, I guess that's my basic overview, and I don't know if you'd like me to walk through. I've kind of highlighted what the major changes in the various programs are. We have the same number of staff today as we did last year. The increases in the budget are basically contractual. They're either the cost of living or in several cases, cost of living and step increases for people who aren't at the maximum step. And with that, I'd open it up to questions.
Thank you so much. Counselor Connors.
And so can you explain to me the OPEB actuarial and what it is and why it was in the FY20 budget? And you guys may have answered this, but I didn't have a chance to look at my emails today. It's been an insane day for me. But if you could just explain that one, that was my only question I had with finance.
Sure, no problem. The town's required to have an actuarial evaluation done every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
And we're currently, in this fiscal year, we have the funds to set aside, and we're in the process of doing that right now. So for fiscal 21, there will be not be a need for it. And when we put together the 22 budget, we will put that amount in for the next valuation.
Excellent. Thank you. That's all I had.
Any other questions from the committee members for Ed? Counselor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just two questions. First, I notice a photocopier or lease in here, similar to what I saw with the library. It's significantly higher than the actuals. And it was explained to us during the library presentation that Bell takes care of all that. But I'm just wondering if across the entire town, if you were to look at all of the photocopy rentals, like in this case, I'm looking at the town accountant, requested budget 35,000, actual for 2019 17,000. If you were to look at every copier across this town and figure that they're all about twice what the actual is, what would that look like in terms of total savings to the budget? You might not be able to answer that right this second.
No.
Or maybe the question is, could we look into that? Because it seems like across the board, those are overestimated.
Sure, we can look back into it. The town had consolidated the copier lease process, and we worked with the procurement department and also Bell. And the last time we went out and reviewed several companies that were on the state contract. We had previously had Xerox, and the new company, I'm drawing a blank on the name, was a lower bidder, and we saved significant money on the townwide copier leases. In the accounting office, I believe that line covers leases for several copiers. There's one on the second floor of Town Hall, one on the first floor of Town Hall, and two in the lower level of Town Hall. And those are under the town accountant's budget. And
Okay.
the other, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So when we did go out, when I first started, each department did their own purchasing and procurement. We basically were able to bring them in under an umbrella, be able to get the best price we could under a state contract, and we've consolidated it. So Bell also helps us with IT support and printers if there's a problem. They can come out. If they can't fix it, then they'll call the maintenance company and they'll come out and work on it. But we've standardized the copiers throughout Town Hall. So the copier we have here, you'll see in the police department, in the elder affairs, over at the library, and townwide.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. The costs have gone down. And if it was reflected in the budget, it might help. So maybe that's something we could look at. My other question would just be, so I think if I understand this correctly, SoftWrite is phasing out, Munis is phasing in. So SoftWrite was about 60,000 annually, and this year we're only budgeting 30,000, give or take, because it's partial year. Is that right?
Yes, we're in the process of phasing out SoftWrite and going to Munis. But basically, it's about a 2.5-year process from start to finish. Originally, we were anticipating going to Munis on April 1st, and because of the situation, we've pushed that forward to July 1st. So the general ledger and the budget package will be established July 1, fiscal 21 in the Munis system. The next phase on January 1 of 2021, we will go live with our payroll system. We chose that date because it's the beginning of the calendar year for the IRS and W-2 purposes. We wanted to have a clean break and start January 1 for the new calendar year 21 for W-2 purposes in Munis. And then what's going to happen in the next phase in April, we'll move forward with our collections, including real estate, personal property, motor vehicle, and go live with those so that for the next July 1, we'll be up and running in Munis. We'll be able to get our preliminary bills out in June for fiscal 22 in Munis.
Okay. And then the $140,000 in the budget for Munis, is that a full year or is that a partial year?
That would be the full year for the whole suite of the operations, yes.
Okay. So in 2022, that's still going to be 140,000. It's not going to be double that because it's not going to increase as those other things are added in.
No, that would be the base, and I believe they've got a cost of living increase included. So it would be
Okay.
140 plus a cost of living adjustment.
Okay. Thank you.
Counselor Connors?
Sorry, Ed, I did have one more question when I flipped down. The consultant, and maybe you just answered this and I missed it, but the consultant, is that for the Munis annual? Is that the consultant for the new system, or is that just consultants in general, and who is it?
Consultant in which program, if you could clarify?
Sorry, in information technology. Oh, 155, 338, 5305 line. $375,000.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. This is the contract that the town has with Beld to provide all of our IT support services. And what this includes is the network that connects all of the town buildings. They also house the software and the hard drives for all of our operations. Beld is the primary location, and they also have a redundant backup located at the police department. They also oversee our IT security. They deal with purchasing of our computer equipment and Microsoft Office and those types of things. And they also have staff that provides day-to-day access, or if we have problems, we go through our help desk network, which is located at Beld, and they dispatch staff or call or look behind the scenes to fix or support us on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee members? Ed, I did want to follow up, and again, if we want to put this towards another evening, that's fine. I did want to follow up on one of the questions from last night about revenue in the free cash balance.
Okay.
So building off of last night's discussion and the memo we received from Sean, that our town's policy is to maintain free cash at 10% of the general fund operating budget. And even before COVID, the free cash balance was, as a percent of the total, was diminishing. So can you help us or walk us through, what, especially again, if understanding this is a unique year, but we are going to have to dip into free cash to cover the operating fund balance, which I don't believe we've had to do in the past. So if we aren't able to generate free cash to the same extent and we're drawing down our reserves, like what is the long-term implications of this? Just again, I want to make sure we're setting expectations appropriately.
Sure, our current balance today is about $9.2 million. And anticipated in our capital plan is to be drawing down about $254,000 of that. We've tried to minimize that, and in previous years, we've spent much larger amounts. So trying to minimize it, we, again, in the capital plan, we'll be seeking to take $254,000 from that balance. That would draw the balance down to about $8.9 million. And we're currently looking at making some a supplemental appropriation, and we've not fine-tuned that yet, but it's somewhere in the roughly $1.5 million range. That would bring the free cash balance down to about $7.4 million. And then in this budget request for fiscal 21, we're asking for $2.3 million. And that would bring our balance down to approximately $5.1 million. Now, the way you basically rebuild free cash is there are two components primarily. Your revenue that you collect is over or higher than your budgeted revenue, and your expenditures that you budget, you spend less than that. And those are the two major sources that would go to increase or start to replenish free cash. Now, again, I hope the timing of this and going forward, if we can open the economy back up, turn things around. The revenue estimates that we have in the budget, I hope will be low. The numbers we collect because of an improving economy would be significantly higher than those budgets. And that component would in turn help replenish or restore free cash going forward at the end of fiscal 21. And on the expenditure side, if we were to not spend as much as we had budgeted, that would be the other component.
Okay. Sean, and again, thank you, Ed. For those of us still learning a lot, Sean, do you have an opinion you can offer or your experience on if this is a red flag? Are you comfortable with this? I think that's where I'm just trying to learn and understand where we go from here.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Councilwoman. And I am cutting in and out too, so I think I caught most of that. But yeah, Braintree is not in a unique position in terms of having to use their free cash more often right now. Other communities I'm seeing too have had to dip into free cash in order to support their 21 budget, either more or like Braintree, who normally doesn't as part of their original operating, have had to dip into it. With the cut in local receipts, with the cut in local aid, state aid, it's almost a requirement unless you're going to cut jobs or significantly reduce expenditures. So going forward, and this is of course up to the mayor and his finance team, going forward, obviously I would recommend, just as Ed would too, building free cash back up to the reserve levels that they've been accustomed to. Is it going to be easy? No. But I know that Ed is a brilliant man and has worked his magic in the past here for Braintree. And I would hope that in the next 3 to 5 years, we get some kind of projection at the economy as well as to how we could better build that free cash going forward. But Braintree is not in a unique situation, that's for sure.
Thanks, Sean. So just to clarify, are you saying you expect it will take 3 to 5 years to build back up the reserves?
It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay.
Typically, historically, it's been a 1% turnback in expenditure appropriations. That's anywhere from, I think, 1.4 to 1.6 million. So let's just say on average, you're turning back that. Well, that right there is $3.5 to $4 million over the next 3 years. if local receipts can be popped back up, if state aid continues to increase, then we could see generation there too. It all depends, and I wish we were all fortune tellers and predictors of the future, but this certainly will not happen overnight. We're not going to go from a projected $5.1 million free cash balance to potentially end fiscal year 20 with, and at the end of 21, see a $10 million number, unless you see a bunch of sale of properties, other miscellaneous non-recurring items that could prop up free cash. Again, can't predict the future, but those are things you can't assume are going to happen.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Counselor Shasha?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Can I just follow up on that last point? Is there a point, Sean, that you think, you know, where the level of free cash is just dangerously low versus decreasing?
Again, and I might let Ed feel this one too. I have clients where they will typically sit around 6 million free cash, and that's a good year for them. Then they plan on spending 5 million free cash almost annually on capital, supplementals, etc. However, because they budget their local receipts so low, they generate a lot of free cash annually. So even though their balance might be 6 and they drop it down to 1, annually they're always generating 4 to 5 million because they are at their levy capacity, but their local receipts are very low. Braintree, unfortunately, is high on both. Your tax levy capacity is about 100% utilization, and your local receipts are really true to actual. So in terms of being nervous, you know, it's a downward trend. And I know myself and Dan Sullivan, my audit partner here, have both shared that sentiment in the past, where Braintree certainly not, the trajectory is not going up, but that doesn't mean it can't in the future.
All right. So if I guess what I'm trying to square in my head is still that 1.2 million that we have in there for expected revenue from property sale, and you know, maybe you could throw in the rental, the billboard rental, but really that 1.2 for me, you know, I'm looking at that and thinking we're dropping from 9+ million down to 3.8 in the next year. Maybe it won't be that low, but then you have the Gulf Fund, some other things that it could be even lower, and that seems like a level to me where I start to get a little concerned.
Sure, and that potential is out there. I mean, that's real. The other potential is maybe we do better at hotel, motel, meals, interest income, so that those actuals come in higher than our very conservative estimates. Again, it's really hard to predict the future, but I'll let Ed speak to that if he would like.
Actually, can I just ask one more question, and then you can both, this will be my last one. Do any towns ever kind of under budget things as they go along and put more in reserve, so that if things pick up as the year goes on, then like even say salary and things like that, or consultants, all these things that we've kind of talked about, could some of that be put in a reserve and, you know, not spent if the money doesn't end up coming in, but then moved out of the reserve fund into the appropriate bucket if the revenues end up being higher or expenses end up being lower than expected?
Yes, we could do that, or basically as part of the budget process. So the free cash is almost that's an account, that's a reserve. It's kind of like for the state calling it a rainy day fund. And basically it's raining here in the community, and we're choosing to draw down on some of that for our fiscal 21 operations. Again, the intent or the hope is that the economy will turn around and we will see a pickup in revenue. And the intent for this year was to draw down on some of those reserves to continue to provide the level of services that the residents of Braintree have come to expect. And for fiscal 22, a year from now, will hopefully be in a much better position. We'll have state aid coming back. The other receipts that Sean had mentioned will be back. And we will not have to draw on free cash, and we can hopefully look to put money back in and start to rebuild. As Sean said, the rebuilding process will not happen overnight. It will take time to get back up to that point.
If I can just make one more point too. You know, if free cash isn't used, then we have to find another revenue source. And if there is no revenue source, that means cut to appropriations. And other communities I've worked with in the past where the funding isn't there, it's typically personnel. And I would make the assumption that no one wants to see, you know, teachers cut, police cut, fire cut. Those are typically some of the larger areas that get looked at for cities and towns of where they can quickly cut positions to save money. You know, no one wants to see people cut, and that's why I believe, you know, free cash is out there to be used and potentially other one-time revenue sources. That's just my own thoughts and feelings. I have not talked to Ed about that at all, but I've seen it other places. So I just wanted to mention that.
No, I agree with Sean and his point. Just one other thing. There is a potential for some reimbursement from the federal government through the CARES Act. There was several billion dollars being allocated to Massachusetts. I believe 45% of that was supposed to come back to locals. I'm not sure. We haven't got guidance as specifically on the amount and then what any restrictions would be on that. In addition, there's talk about another stimulus package that would go directly to help cities and towns potentially. And if they were to send money back to communities, maybe something similar to the old federal revenue sharing program where they made payments directly to the community, and those funds could be used directly in the operation of the town budget. Potential federal money could be used to replace the use of free cash. Or that federal money could just come in as revenue and close out and rebuild free cash going forward. We just don't know right now what the federal government's going to do, what rules they're going to have on the potential reimbursements, and then the other wild card is just state aid and what they're going to do to communities. I guess just one other point on state aid is that the amount we receive is a smaller percentage for Braintree than a lot of the less affluent cities out there. Potentially cities get 70 to 80% of their revenue for the general fund coming directly from state aid. So any cut to a community getting 80% of its money from state aid is going to cause significant difficulties. And I'll defer to Sean if, again, he may be aware of some of the cities, and I think 70, 80% is not out is realistic for some of these other cities out there.
Absolutely, Ed. I know clients of mine that have 67% funded, and they're extremely nervous about fiscal year 21. And some of these clients may even be net school spending schools. So you get your Chapter 70 money in, the state says this is adequate funding to fund education, and certain places stick by that. So if Chapter 70 gets cut, that's almost automatic teacher layoffs. So for those communities that rely on state aid for the majority of their revenue, it's a scary time, that's for sure.
Thank you. Counselor Connors?
Sorry. Ed, can you go through, I know and I'm in the Treasurer Department 145, OPED liability. We took that out this year. I know earlier in the year we had talked about having a plan to get on track with that and what's going on with it, but I see it's removed for this year. Obviously, I know there's budget constraints, but can you just explain the reasoning behind why and what effect it's going to have with the plan we had in place to catch up?
The amount in the budget is zero, and that's $755,000 less than what was in the budget for this year.
Mm-hmm.
So we will not be putting that amount into the OPEB trust this year. The plan would be over the next few years to, again, start to rebuild the amount going into this account with the ultimate goal of getting the OPEB fund fully funded. The long-term plan for this was to start to increase the annual appropriation here in this budget by, was about $145,000 a year. And when the town's pension plan is fully funded, and again, the actuarial target is 2033, what we're going to see is a significant reduction in the required annual pension appropriation. And the plan is to take the savings of the decrease in the pension appropriation and increase this OPEB liability line significantly and be able to put a significant increased amount of money into the OPEB fund.
So how does that, so we were supposed to be whole by 2033. Is this not putting in this year? Is that going to have an effect still on our long-term goals?
The 2033 is the target date plan to have our pension system fully funded.
Fully funded.
This OPEB is primarily the healthcare component for retired employees. And right now, the state does not have a statutory requirement to get to fully funding. But our plan was to start with increases here and in 2034, shift the balance of the reduction in the pension funding into the OPEB funding and get that funded over the next few years after 2033.
Was this our first year trying to do this? It wasn't, right? No, we've been putting in every year.
Back in fiscal 2010, we went to the council and asked them to adopt an OPEB trust. And for fiscal 2011, we made our first appropriation into that. In addition, Belda's making payments in, and we're charging the enterprise funds their component portion of it. And today, we have a significant balance in the OPEB trust. I saw the statement the other day, but I'm drawing a blank on the balance. It's in the $14 million range we have set aside of assets for our OPEB trust. And back in 2010, there were no assets set aside. So we've made significant progress going forward. I believe, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we're in the 8% funded. I believe the liability was about $120 million.
That sounds about right. And I actually have the OPEB balance too, but I had to close some of my screens because my computer was freezing. So once that pops back open, I'll get you that number.
And Sean, just your opinion, dropping out the OPEB, the liability, putting it in this year, no detrimental effect on future, other than the fact that we're a little bit more behind at this point because of it?
No, I agree. And again, I'm actually interim finance director for another community right now, and that's also on their plate too, is potentially stop the funding for the current year. It doesn't impact current services, which is a plus for administration and those overseeing the budget. Yes, it puts off helping out the liability in the future, but because there is no set date it has to be funded by, I don't want to say everything's gravy right now that you're putting into it, because you'd rather get ahead of that curve sooner rather than later.
Right.
But I also don't think 1 year of not funding it is going to cripple the town or extend it by another 10 years or something like that.
And there's no penalties or anything like that for not putting something in this year, correct?
Nope.
Okay.
Just one other point. There are a number of communities that are out there that have not done anything. So I believe we're ahead of the curve looking at cities and towns in Massachusetts.
Okay. All right, I have one more question. Just the on the finance, the reserve for capital. I saw some emails, and you guys may have already answered this, but the decrease from the $880,000 reserve for capital. Is that, and it may be answered in my emails, and forgive me for not being able to catch up on those today, but
No, that's fine. This program was basically established to set up a funding program for the two middle schools. And what this 880,000 is going to do, what you'll see is a decrease in the fiscal 21 amount there. And then on the lines below it, principal and bonds, you'll see an increase of 360,000 there.
Yeah.
Interest on bonds, you'll see an increase of 187,000 there. In short-term interest, you'll see a 41,000. What we're doing is decreasing that amount and increasing the amounts in the principal, interest, and short-term notes. We're in the process of funding the last portion of the East Middle School. We're in the process of bonding $5.2 million. And that those increases are corresponding principal and interest increases in the East Middle School project funding.
okay, so this was all the middle school funding.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have. I swear this time. That's all I have.
All good. Thank you so much. Do any other committee members have questions for Ed on the finance portion of the budget? Okay, I just want to say it. I know the team's been working tirelessly to ensure that we are able to maintain our critical key positions, and in fact, more than that, right? All the positions in town and our key services, and I am extremely grateful we're able to do so. I think that in exceptional times, we have to do exceptional things, and this feels like the right approach to me. So thank you for taking the time to walk through all of the mechanics. It helps me immeasurably to be able to explain it when people ask. So I really appreciate it, and appreciate all the hard work that you guys did.
Thank you, and thank the committee for their questions, all good questions. And if any other things come up, please email Nicole or I, and be happy to. What I'll do is turn you back over to Nicole.
Okay,
Thank you and good night.
thank you. Okay, believe this concludes our agenda for this evening. And so I'm looking at the, Sue, do I go to table?
Yes, please, table 20-038.
So
Motion.
moved.
Thank you, Charlie. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Clerk Semino?
Council Verica,
Yes.
Council Connors,
Aye.
Council Flaherty,
Yes.
Council Ryan,
Aye.
Council Sasha,
Yes.
all in favor.
Thank you. Next is 20039 FY 2021 Budget Community Preservation Committee, or take up any action relative thereto. No action is required on this evening. This will be discussed when the Planning Department is presenting, and it has been tabled to May 18th, 2020. I think a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Thank you, Sue. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Clerk Semino.
Council Verica,
Yes.
Council Connors,
Yes.
Council Flaherty,
Yes.
Council Ryan,
Yes.
and Council Sasha,
Yes.
all in favor.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock.
See you tomorrow.
Nicole, more
Thank you.
questions tomorrow.
Good
What's
night,
that?
everybody.
Good
Have a
night.
good night.
Yeah.